Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Behind Headlines, and in this programme tonight we shall be discussing the death of the Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi, who died in a helicopter crash on Sunday the 19th of May, which has caused profound shock and panic into the heart of the Iranian regime. But we also saw the courage and the bravery of so many Iranians who love freedom by celebrating the death of Raisi, and we'll also be asking, what does the death of President Raisi mean for the future of the Islamic Republic of Iran? Reagan, events are just absolutely extraordinary. What we are seeing today in the Middle East, and knowing, for example, that President Ebrahim Raisi is known as the Butcher of Tehran for his for the murder of anything between 3,000 and 30,000 Iranian citizens during his reign when he was head of the Iranian judiciary in 1988, has been absolutely shocking. But the fact is that we here has sent shockwaves into the heart of the Iranian regime as Ebrahim Raisi died on Sunday night. What are your thoughts on the death of President Raisi that has really shaken the Iranian regime?
Well, it comes only about a month after President Raisi and the Iranian regime launched an unprecedented missile and drone assault on the only democratic nation state in the Middle East. Of course, that's Israel. It was an abysmal failure. Israel then was very strategic in how it responded to that. It was in a way that it was basically impossible for the regime to not come away with without some egg on its face over what was a catastrophic failure on multiple fronts. But it's not just President Raisi who perished in this, what was initially billed as a hard landing in dense fog. It was a crash, as it turns out. We also see that the Iranian foreign minister, Hossein Amir Abdullahian, Mohammed Ali Al-Hashim, the regime's representative in East Azerbaijan, and Malak Ramati, the province's governor, they were also killed along with the pilot and co-pilot. They had been on a state visit to Azerbaijan to open a new dam on the Aras River, a joint project by both nations, when they crashed into a mountain in dense fog. And I cannot, Simon, look at this story without seeing God's hand sovereignly at work in it. You know, the scriptures speak of how God himself overthrows kingdoms and rulers and governors and those people who come against those whom he has a special covenant relationship with. And I remind that there is a special ongoing covenant relationship with the people of Israel in regards to its land. We see consistently throughout history. We see also in regards to the prophecies concerning the last days that God will enter into judgment on those who seek to divide the land that he has given to his people. He will enter into judgment on those who come against his people. It's right there in the beginning. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you, he says to Abraham, speaking specifically of his ethnic offspring. And 1 month after an unprecedented assault on Israel, I don't think there's any coincidence in this. I don't believe Israel was involved, but I know the God of Israel was involved.
Absolutely. That's a good way of putting it, because the Israeli government have come out and said that they are categorically were not involved in the death of President Raisi. But it also, as you said, poses that great theological challenge to the enemies of Israel, that according to Genesis 12, 1-3, I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you. And we know that Raisi, as president of Iran, would have cursed Israel, responsible also one of maybe the architects as well of October the 7th by supporting Hamas and Hezbollah. And there's a price to pay. And this regime's days are actually numbered. But we also saw, for example, that Raisi was appointed and elected as the Iranian president back in 2021. His legacy since taking office has been crushing the Iranian women's uprising through force and bloodshed. He also imposed and strengthened Iran's what's known as morality laws, the wearing of the hijab, with great force, and reopposed the regime's control over the Iranian people. Plus, he's also been instrumental in negotiating on behalf of the Iranian regime its nuclear weapons program as well, and of course not forgetting its sponsorship of international terrorism. But we did see the incredible courage shown by so many Iranian people who love freedom by celebrating the death of Raisi. And of course, it was also Raisi was seen as the successor to the supreme leader, Khomeini. And now that has completely been blown out of the water. So it's interesting to see the impact that the death of President Raisi will have on the Iranian regime.
Well, the charred wreckage of the helicopter was located after a 15-hour search, some time after it was feared, right from the beginning, after the helicopter disappeared. It was deemed very, very likely that the president had perished, and potentially all those on board is what occurred. And there were no signs of life at all detected among the helicopter's passengers. Eventually the bodies were recovered and search operations ended, sparking definitely fear in the regime itself, unrest. Certainly there's going to be some questions as to long term, what this is going to look like, what this is going to mean. They will have another president after the current interim for a space of time. But the reality of this is that it's exposed some of the fault lines within the regime, as we've seen yet again, masses of Iranians, masses of the common populace flocking to the streets, fearlessly indicating and showing their own feelings on this. This is not a celebration of life ceremony, setting off of fireworks. This is not the custom when a public office holder and dignitary dies and his death is being mourned. There were people celebrating, giving out sweets and firing off the fireworks there. There had to be some of those gatherings obviously shut down by the regime's Revolutionary Guard Corps. But what we're seeing is increasing fractions within Iran. This is not going to be the end of the regime. Business will continue as usual. Tragically, there will be more and more bloodshed. We will see ongoing attacks against Israel through Iran's proxies. This is not going to do anything more than give a little bit of a wound to Iran, I believe. But at the same time, I do believe we're seeing the people of Iran emboldened, and I believe the days are numbered.
No, absolutely. And also, we've seen that we've had condemnation and messages of condolences from the likely trios. These are the nations that have sent their condolences to the Iranian regime. They are Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Russia, China, and Turkey, as well as the European Union, which activated its rapid response mapping service to aid the search effort. US President Joe Biden had also been briefed on the crash, as US officials said, on the condition of anonymity. Tehran announced the deaths came 16 hours after contact was lost with a helicopter. The Iranian Red Crescent reported that some 14 hours of searching that the helicopter's remains had been located. We've also seen, for example, the Telegraph reports today that the President of the European Union has also sent his condolences to the Iranian regime, and with the death of the Butcher of Tehran, which is horrific. If you consider and if we care about the plight of the Iranian people, this is awful. So let's just have a look now at one of the latest reports from our friends at CBN that reports on the death of the Iranian President Raisi.
Iran's supreme leader appointed First Vice President Mohammad Makbir as the country's acting president after Raisi's death. Iran's cabinet also announced they would continue the policies of Raisi. According to a TV state report, Raisi's helicopter crashed in bad weather after returning from inaugurating a dam in Iran's East Azerbaijan province. Iran's foreign minister also died in the crash. The crash comes after months of war between Iran's proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, and Iran's unprecedented drone and missile attack in April. Raisi is known as the Butcher of Tehran for his involvement in sentencing thousands of political opponents to death in the 1980s after the Islamic Revolution. During his term as president, he suppressed massive protests against the regime and also oversaw Iran's nuclear program get closer to weapons-grade uranium than ever. And he was an implacable foe of Israel, but Israel is denying any involvement in his death.
Thanks to our friends at CBN once more for their efficiency in reporting. The death of the Iranian regime president Ebrahim Raisi followed a state official visit to Azerbaijan. Here is what took place in the day preceding his death. According to the office website of the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, he met with the Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi at the state border between the two nations. A major project has been implemented here, and it is a very successful meeting for the two peoples. We will inaugurate a project, the commissioning of which is of great importance for the two peoples and two states. This in itself is a significant event that very important projects can be implemented between two peoples and two states. Some may not like our meetings and our joint successes. This is important to us. The main thing is that we have implemented together what is good for our countries, states, and peoples.
I mean, it was a big event between Azerbaijan and also the Iranian regime. Now, what troubles me, for example, is that we see that Israel, sadly, is actually close to Azerbaijan, but we know that also Azerbaijan was also responsible for the attack on Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh, which hardly had any news or any press coverage whatsoever. So the fact that there was a demonstration of strength between the Iranian regime and Azerbaijan that's also supported by the Turks is a kind of very worrying, I think, trend going into the future. And the fact is that for the opening of this new dam for these new nations, that the Iranian president Raisi was there, his foreign secretary was there, as well as other leading dignitaries. Meeting with the president of Azerbaijan was really a kind of show of force for the two people and the two nations, but also, I think, also shows the kind of danger really facing Armenia, because in terms of geopolitics, it's the Iranian regime that's actually protecting the Armenians. Now, for example, if we're seeing a close cooperation between Iran and Azerbaijan, the likelihood that this spells trouble for Armenia, but also spells trouble for Israel. And Israel has to possibly rethink its relationship with Azerbaijan, knowing how close these two nations are together, as well as possibly giving away some of Israeli military know-how to the Iranian regime.
Well, we did a program last year on Nagorno-Karabakh and the onslaught of Azerbaijan in Armenia, and it is interesting. We talked about the confusing lack of moral clarity that Israel had on that situation at the time, and of course it's keen, it needs as many friends as it can get in one way, but with friends like Azerbaijan, who needs enemies? And the reality of it, when Azerbaijan is connecting with and having very friendly ties with Iran in this situation, that doesn't bode well for future health and good relationship with Israel. Not the least of which, you can also make a note of the fact that there's a significant Armenian population in Israel. Jerusalem, of course, has a set-aside Armenian quarter. And so the Israeli government's attempt to hold on to close connection to Azerbaijan also presents some internal challenges as well. But the statement went on to say by the on this Azerbaijani website in regard to its leader. Of course, the joint success of our people makes our friends happy, and those who don't like it, I think it would be better if they minded their own business. Not exactly the most professional way of putting something. Not really a diplomatic way.
Not statesman-like, is it?
It's not very statesman-like. It may be true. You might think it, but you don't say it, even if you think it.
Yes, it was in the official press release.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
President of Azerbaijan.
It's incredible, but that's where we're at in politics these days, I think. The main thing is that the states of Iran and Azerbaijan show a very strong joint political will today, openly declare to their people and the whole world that we are together and we will continue to be together. Iran-Azerbaijani relationships are an important condition for stability in our region. Of course, such a wonderful project will improve the well-being of our people and increase jobs, thus becoming the next step towards success. I'm sure that there will be many similar joint projects in the future. Now, what's troubling about this is that he says we're together. Now, and it's not just we're together in this, or, you know, we need this hydraulic dam, we need to do this for the good of our peoples, and we've agreed to put our differences aside for this particular project. Nothing like that. No, it's saying we're together. It's a statement of unity, which doesn't bode well for its ongoing relationship with Israel.
Absolutely. Now, it's important to know who the Butcher of Tehran was, a.k.a. Ebrahim Raisi, the former Iranian president who died on Sunday. So according to the Daily Telegraph, under this headline, it says, who was Ebrahim Raisi, the hardline Iranian president with a vice-like grip on power? So the Telegraph report that Raisi is the Iranian's hardline president, quickly ascended to the ranks of the Islamic Republic and ultimately positioned himself as a potential successor to al-Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran. It says that Mr. Raisi, who died aged 63 in a helicopter crash on Sunday, failed to win the 2017 presidential election as the main ultra-conservative candidate, instead being handed a post as head of the judicial branch of the Islamic Republic. Goes on to say, but he ran for president again in 2021. He easily won, partly due to the disqualification of many viable opponents and moderate candidates. I think we have to make it clear, don't we, that when it comes to the Iranian presidential elections, firstly, the presidential role is not one that has too much power, because the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Khamenei, has ultimate power and control in Iran. These are not open and free elections, because only candidates that have the blessing of the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, can actually stand. So you don't have any candidates who oppose the regime. It's a question of semi-moderates or extremists standing as the presidential candidate. So we can see that this isn't a democratic system. But
there's low turnout.
Yeah.
Incredibly low voter turnout for that election, which Raisi won. It was the lowest turnout that Iran had seen. Less than half of the country's eligible voters turned out to lend support to anyone.
And Telegraph goes on to report that Mr. Raisi lacked political experience, but his role as the member of the three-member death committee that decided the fates of political prisoners in 1988 had helped propel him up the ranks, winning him the support of the powerful figures among Iran's theocratic rulers. And this is where he gets the term Butcher of Tehran from. Literally, he was responsible for the murder of anything between 3,000 and 30,000 Iranian dissidents, many of them juveniles, who found themselves at odds with the Iranian regime, were brutally murdered and put to their death at the hands of Raisi.
Yeah, and there were others who were tortured in extreme ways, amputations also inflicted on prisoners. And his trajectory was consistent throughout, ever since he really rose to power, assigned by Ayatollah Khamenei to resolve critical judicial cases after the Bloody Summer of 1988. He then began to carry out God's decree is how it's put on cases that had stalled in the Supreme Judicial Council. Most of these ended up swinging from cranes in Tehran, as the habit of hanging from cranes, as in building construction cranes, is quite common there. Now, the series of promotions eventually saw him become the first deputy head of the judiciary in 2003, the second most powerful figure in Iran's judicial system, and he held on to that position for a decade. He continued his hardline stance as president, and they're saying that his policies will be continued under the interim president, and it's highly unlikely that anything serious is going to change with the new president. A year after his election, he did order authorities to tighten enforcement on Iran's hijab and chastity laws, restricting women's dress and behavior. And within weeks, we had that tragic story of the young Kurdish Iranian woman, Mahsa Amini, dying in police custody after being arrested and severely beaten by morality police for allegedly violating the law. Her hijab was not fixed properly. It's not that she wasn't wearing a hijab, it's that it wasn't fixed in their criteria. It's absolutely shameful. Resulted in months of protest, and I'm told, Simon, that many of these protests continue to some degree. We're not publicizing them heavily here. You know, there's news fatigue, different news cycles that we go through, but there are countless Iranians who have lost their lives in protesting and
According
advocating.
to Daily Telegraph, 500 Iranians have lost their lives in protesting against the regime's morality police, and also that 22,000 Iranians were detained in the months-long crackdown by the morality police and security services that followed. I mean, it's very much a bigger revolution than what we saw with the Green Revolution, with the re-election of the then President Ahmadinejad back in 2009.
Yeah.
And of course, this was on a bigger scale, which really did almost bring the regime to its knees. But it was the crackdown was led by Raisi himself on the Iranian people. I will also see that protests alongside a failure to turn around Iran's struggling economy, hung-strung by Western sanctions and mismanagement, may have diminished Mr. Raisi's popularity at home, but he retained the support of his mentor, the supreme leader of Iran, the most powerful man in Iran. Of course, the president of Iran, formerly Raisi, also called for the destruction of the State of Israel. So let's have a look at these videos, courtesy of the Israeli Foreign Ministry, that ask the very important question: who is President Raisi?
Ebrahim Raisi is an extremist who is personally responsible for thousands of deaths. He is sanctioned by the United States Treasury for these horrible crimes: executions of individuals who were juveniles at the time of their crime, and the torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment of prisoners in Iran, including amputations. As Deputy Prosecutor General of Tehran, Raisi participated in a so-called death commission that ordered the extrajudicial executions of thousands of political prisoners in 1988. Here is what Iranians think of it. This extremist outlaw Iranian regime will present a danger to the international community. Iranians don't trust them. Why should the international community?
We have a special guest joining us now from Israel. She's an award-winning American-Israeli journalist. She needs no introduction. Her name is Emily Schrader. Emily, so pleased you can join us for Behind Headlines, and kol hakavod to you for the incredible work that you've been doing ever since October the 7th in being such an incredible ambassador for Israel and the Jewish people, and for standing up for the free people of Iran. And we salute you on this program.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And I love the hoodie, by the way. We all agree that Hamas are terrorists. Emily, what are your thoughts on the death of Ebrahim Raisi, the Iranian president known as the Butcher of Tehran?
I mean, I think that the world just became a little bit better place. This is a person who is a murderer. He has the blood of thousands of innocent Iranians on his hands. This is something that the world has kind of turned a blind eye to for many years. It's outrageous that he ever could have become the president of Iran, or really the Islamic Republic, not Iran. And so I think that's the reason why you see so many people today across the world, from the Iranian diaspora as well as inside of Iran, celebrating his death. No one supports this regime. This is a terrorist dictatorship that is oppressing their own people just as badly as they are the other people throughout the Middle East and beyond that they are oppressing.
Now, Raisi's death comes only about a month after this unprecedented assault on Israel with various drones, ballistic missiles, and whatnot. And following his death, we saw the UN Security Council actually have a minute's silence in remembrance of him, presumably. And the EU president also sent condolences. What do you make of some of the moral response to Raisi's death?
I think it's obscene. I think it's an absolute slap in the face to every single victim of Raisi, which currently includes 80 million Iranians, not to mention all of the people he's responsible for their deaths in the past. It's a disgrace. I am appalled by the reaction of world leadership, sending condolences for the death of a literal mass murderer. Where was the moment of silence for the victims of Raisi? Where's the moment of silence for the women who are in Iranian prison, who have been tortured and sexually assaulted at the hands of the Islamic Republic under the direction of Ebrahim Raisi? Where's the moment of silence for that? Or do none of those people matter? Do Iranian lives not matter to these people? It's an absolute shame that countries which claim to defend and support basic freedoms and equality, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, democracy, women's rights, like the United States, Canada, Europe, that they would send a message of condolence to this murderer. It's sickening, and it shows the blatant hypocrisy of the United Nations.
And Emily, just share your thoughts a moment for the incredible bravery and courage of the free people of Iran to actually celebrate the death of President Raisi with fireworks and the giving out of sweets, and the courage it would have taken them to actually do that, knowing that this is a very vile and oppressive regime in Tehran.
I mean, immediately we did see celebrations in the streets. I was receiving messages from many of my friends in Tehran and beyond saying, oh my gosh, it's so exciting. We're so happy that this happened. It's a step in the right direction. And we immediately saw fireworks in multiple cities, in Rasht, in Mashhad, which is actually a religious city, in Tehran, in various neighborhoods. And we also saw almost simultaneously a huge deployment of IRGC and Basiji forces on the ground there, who went to shut down and to deter some of these demonstrations or displays of support for the death of Raisi, and of course also the foreign minister, Amir Abdullahian.
What do you think the impact of Raisi's death will be on the regime going forward? Will it be business as usual? Will his replacement be worse? Where do you think things are going for the regime?
Well, for right now, there will be an interim president, Mohamed Mokhber, and after or within 50 days, they'll call elections for a new president. I think we can reasonably expect that his replacement will be just as bad, because this is a regime, this is a terrorist regime. The problem is not only Raisi. That being said, I don't think in the big picture a lot is going to change on this front. I don't think that this was a sabotaged operation, certainly not by any foreign interference. At least all the evidence we have so far doesn't point to anything like that. Most likely this was just a bad weather accident that took place. And so I don't think we're going to see a lot of changes on the ground internationally. Domestically, maybe. There may be some changes because there's a lot of political interest going on right now inside of Iran. They have elections coming up with a very low turnout, an expected turnout of lower than 15%, proving that they really don't have a mandate to lead. And so the regime, in order to restore their legitimacy, is trying to get higher voter turnout to show people, oh, see, we're the credible leaders of Iran, when they're really not. And so there are some political interests at hand here. It's possible, I've heard rumors that the regime thought this would bring more people to the polls because a national tragedy brings people together. There's also the argument I've heard that perhaps this is really about moving Raisi out of the way so that Mujtaba Khamenei, the son of the Ayatollah, can ultimately assume the position of supreme leader with Raisi out of the picture, who is considered the favorite. Although, despite all these conspiracies that are going around, we don't really have evidence for any of them at this point.
And can you give us advice how the West can stand not only with Israel after the horrors of what happened on October the 7th, and tragically Israel was put on trial by the International Criminal Court regarding this, but to actually give hope to the free people of Iran who are fighting tyranny and this evil and vile regime that is the Islamic Republic of Iran?
I think that individuals who have the privilege to live in democratic countries need to use that right and their access to elected officials to constantly draw their attention to this issue, to call for enforcement, not just sanctions, but enforcement of sanctions, to demand that the IRGC be designated as a terrorist organization and that all the laws surrounding that are enforced. You need to have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to dealing with this regime. And ultimately, at the end of the day, Europe, the United States, Canada, the Western world are going to have to unify against the Islamic Republic, hopefully not with war, but perhaps even diplomatically, and saying, listen, you, the Islamic Republic, do not have a mandate to lead the Iranian people. And trust me, they do not. And we do not recognize you, and we don't want you and your terrorist antics in our country. Expel the ambassadors, and ultimately, at some point, we're going to have to cut off relations with them because this regime is not a legitimate regime. They're a terrorist dictatorship that is actively oppressing their own people as well as all the people of the Middle East. And given the ability, they will do even worse to Europe, which is what they are working on now. They've been very clear about their intent. And so we need to unify as democratic states which purport to protect civil rights and civil liberties. We need to unite against this.
And finally, Emily, please share your thoughts on how the Iranian regime needs to be in the dock, not the Prime Minister of Israel and the Defense Minister of Israel by the International Criminal Court, considering that the Iranian regime was the architect of October the 7th, supports Hamas, supports Hezbollah, the Houthis, Palestine Islamic Jihad, the Al-Qaeda leadership, and also was very much involved in supporting the emergence of ISIS before ISIS became a threat to the Islamic Republic.
Well, I'm not sure I need to add anything to all of what you detailed, but you're exactly right. I mean, it's outrageous that they would go after the leaders of a sovereign democratic country, which is defending itself in a just war, instead of the terrorist dictatorships that have been doing this, like the Islamic Republic, as you mentioned, for 45 years. I mean, there's literally a list 20 pages long of different things that you can and should charge the leaders of Iran with, the leaders of the Islamic Republic, I should clarify, at the ICC. And yet all we see is the ICC being used as a political tool. And you know what, frankly, this is really outrageous to be using an international body that is intended to fight against crimes against humanity and against genocide. It's outrageous that such a body should be used for political purposes in order to target and exclusively target only the Jewish state. I mean, it's outrageous, and it's an insult to every people who has ever suffered through crimes against humanity or genocide.
Emily, we just want to thank you so much for joining us from Israel today. Please keep up the excellent work that you are doing in defending Israel, the Jewish people, and the free people of Iran. And I want one of those hoodies as well. They look cool. So thank you for joining us today on Behind Headlines.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again to Emily Schrader for a very helpful comment there. We're now going to remind ourselves of what took place when Ebrahim Raisi was inaugurated as president of the Iranian regime.
Ebrahim Raisi takes over as the 8th president of the Islamic regime. The sanctions imposed against the Iranian nation must be lifted. We will support any diplomatic plan that supports this goal.
Raisi spoke at his swearing-in ceremony, where he touted his country as the true defenders of human rights and a force for peace in the region.
Iran's regional capacities back peace and stability in countries and will only be used to confront threats of domineering and tyrant powers.
Raisi is considered a hardliner, a carbon copy of religious leader Ayatollah Khamenei, and the first Iranian president to be sanctioned by the U.S. even before taking office.
Ebrahim Raisi is called the Butcher of Tehran, actually, because he has a long track record of killing his own people, going back to 1988. You can say that he's probably responsible for at least 10,000 Iranians being executed.
Len Khodorkovsky, a former senior advisor to the U.S. envoy for Iran, says although the Ayatollah is the ultimate decision maker, Raisi won't give up much in talks to reinstate the Iranian nuclear deal, officially known as the JCPOA.
We can expect them to play hardball, and we're seeing them playing hardball right now through their attacks on our interests, through the attacks on an Israeli-owned ship just a few days ago.
Khodorkovsky says it's the Iranian negotiating style.
What they're sensing is that the Biden administration is signaling weakness. They're seeing that there's no price that they have to pay after each of these attacks. And in return, instead of playing hardball, the Biden administration makes more and more concessions.
Israel, the U.S., and U.K. are blaming Iran for the attack on the Israeli-operated oil tanker called Mercer Street that left 2 Europeans dead. Iran denies its involvement. Israel is trying to rally international support for sanctions against Iran, but some 70 countries and the European Union attended Raisi's inauguration.
And the Butcher of Tehran is no more, and that was his inauguration back in 2021. Thanks to our friends at CBN.
Very helpful perspective there, Simon. We have to consider this also in the context of the surrounding global situation and some of the comments from Iran's proxy terror groups have been very, very telling. And it's interesting, there is a lot of outcry in the West against the Iranian regime. There has been over the years in regard to its crimes against women particularly. And there's a significant amount of people who I feel are completely ignorant that their support for groups like Hamas and Hezbollah tie them in to supporting the Iranian regime. This is what we see some of the leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah say in response to the death of the Iranian President Raisi. These leaders, this is from the JNS reporting, these leaders supported the legitimate struggle of our people against the Zionist entity, provided valued support to the Palestinian resistance, and made tireless efforts in solidarity and support in all forms and fields for our people in the steadfast Gaza Strip during the Battle of Al-Aqsa flood, Hamas said, referring to the war it launched on October the 7th when it led an assault on the northwestern Negev, killing, wounding, and kidnapping thousands of civilians and soldiers.
Can I stop you there?
Yeah,
I think when we actually see that Hamas is praising Iran, you see the connection
100%.
between the atrocities, which was the massacre of October the 7th by Hamas.
It wasn't a battle, it was a massacre.
And its support from the Iranian regime. Yeah. So here we go. If anyone wanted the evidence, Hamas has actually presented the evidence to the world of Iran's direct involvement in October the 7th. And with this kind of tweet or X statement that was put out by Hamas, they're literally telling the world that the Iranians were the mastermind behind this, and they couldn't have done that without their support, which we know, and we've done programs on this. But so many ignorant students who are on our university campuses, both here in Britain and in the United States, protesting against Israel, do they really want to align themselves with a totalitarian regime such as Iran that actually persecutes students in Iran and actually hang them and treat women in the way that they do with a crackdown with the morality police? And here we are. We have the Hamas literally then giving evidence of the Iranian support for Hamas's massacre on October the 7th.
Well, I think we've seen that anything is acceptable as long as it's targeting Jews. That's what we've seen in the past few months. And so, you know, it's fascinating here even how they term it, the Battle of Al-Aqsa Flood. What's interesting is this was a massacre. This was not a battle. It was a massacre. What occurred was against civilians. Now, we can talk about a battle, but Hamas is only successful when it's massacring unarmed civilians. Let's talk about the battles that have happened since then in Gaza. Hamas is a total military failure. It fires rockets on Israeli cities that can't even make it over the Gaza Strip, that fall on its own people. It cannot stand and face the IDF itself. It has to hide cowardly behind its own civilians it uses as human shields. So, you know, but this is a very, very telling little bit of comment from Hamas. They also made significant political and diplomatic efforts to go on to stop the Zionist aggression against our Palestinian people. The Muslim Brotherhood, affiliate with close ties to the regime in Tehran, added.
Yeah, and let's also, Hamas is the offshoot of the Egyptian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. It's the Palestinian branch, together with the President of Turkey, Erdogan, and the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood is based in Qatar, and they are known as the godfathers of international Islamic terrorism. And again, we're seeing here the Muslim Brotherhood saying they align themselves with the Iranian regime, despite the fact that it's a Shia theocracy and they're Sunnis. They both share the same ideological goals to eradicate and annihilate Israel and to destroy the West. And again, here we go. So we got Hamas has said we have support from the Iranian regime. The Muslim Brotherhood, who are very much infiltrated the Biden administration, are probably playing a key role in determining US foreign policy towards Israel and the Middle East, is probably being influenced by those who are members of the Muslim Brotherhood. And of course, lastly, we've got Hezbollah, Iran's terror proxy based up in southern Lebanon. They, ever since October the 7th, haven't stopped firing their rockets and missiles into northern Israel. They say that, this is what they say, Iran's terrorist proxy in Lebanon eulogized Raisi as the protector of resistance movements. Hezbollah in Lebanon extends its deepest condolences. The group said, it's a terror organization, adding that the Iranian president was a strong supporter and a staunch defender of our causes and a protector of the resistance movement. Now, knowing that Hezbollah, knowing that Hamas are genocidal terrorist organizations, we see that the Iranian regime is also supporting genocide. Now, we have, as of the recording of this program, news has broken that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, together with his defense minister, have had an indictment against them by the International Criminal Court, wanting their extradition to face crimes of genocide and crimes against humanity, when really we see all the evidence here that the Iranian regime should be the one in the dock, not Israel.
Well, and this is definitely what we're seeing and what we need to discuss, Simon, because unfortunately we lack moral clarity. And we've seen the lack of moral clarity. We've already mentioned some of that international response to Raisi's death. Okay, it's one thing we can say and uphold with Scripture, the Lord doesn't take pleasure in the death of the wicked. Why? Because there's wickedness and there's this is messing everything up. It's something that is His will. It's something that's His plan. He doesn't take pleasure in the death of the wicked because of all that's gone on previous that has been wicked. It's one thing to take pleasure in and have a sort of sick satisfaction over death. It's quite another to send condolences and to in some way memorialize and honor a man who is guilty of massacring up to 30,000 of his own people. And this is what we saw. The UN Security Council, bizarrely, UK and US representatives standing up at the UN Security Council, everyone just very piously and very somberly, as if it was, well thought of head of state, giving honor. There's no honor that's due to this individual. I think there's more sense in how the Iranian populace responded with the firing of fireworks and the giving out of sweets. This says more about what's actually gone on in Iran.
Yeah,
but let's focus on Israel and the only democratic state. Let's condemn them. Let's talk about how they are guilty of war crimes for self-defense, essentially.
I mean, look, as of the recording of this program today, in the Daily Telegraph, I've got a title, "Not in My Name, Politicians Livid as EU Leaders' Sympathy Message." So it says here that the European Council President was criticised by politicians across Europe after offering Iran and the EU's sincere condolences for the death of Ebrahim Raisi. Pro-EU MEPs and Eurosceptics like Geert Wilders were briefly united in rejecting Charles Mitchell's message of sympathy for the Iranian president after the Butcher of Tehran was confirmed dead yesterday. Hundreds of Iranians have now been killed during Tehran's crackdown on women-led protests and Europeans. And of course, you've got a cartoon.
Sincere condolences. Sincere condolences. Not for the people that Raisi slaughtered, not for the people that the regime will continue to slaughter, not for the people, doubtless, who were celebrating, who've already been slaughtered or imprisoned or tortured. Sincere condolences to a man whose nickname is the Butcher of Tehran. It doesn't make sense. Where's the moral clarity?
What it shows is, as you say, rightly say there, Reagan, that the West has lost its complete moral clarity. It's interesting how, for example, the European Union believes that the Iranian regime is not at war with Europe, when we know that the Iranian regime is at war with Israel. It's a war against Christians, particularly its own Christians in Iran. It's at war against the United States and has been ever since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. But it's also at war with the European Union and also with Britain as well. And then we honour the president of Iran. It's almost very similar kind of response of what we saw from the Republic of Ireland after the death of Hitler, when the Taoiseach then famously sent his condolences to the Nazi regime with the death of Hitler back in May of 1945. Raisi has blood on his hands. He has the Iranian people's blood on his hands. He has the blood on his hands of the Israeli victims of Hamas's terrorist attack on October the 7th. Those who have been murdered by Hezbollah, by the Houthis, by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Al-Qaeda, and also, for example, ISIS as well. So we see that Iran is the problem. Iran is the menace in the international community.
Well, I think we have an modern day axis of evil that we can talk about, and I think we can start by just including some of those countries that sent their condolences: Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Russia, China, and Turkey, as well as indeed the European Union, which we're blessed to be out of, but for some reason somehow continue to maintain ties and hold on to some carryovers from that. It's incredibly dangerous when we see the societies that claim to champion democracy and freedom reaching out in these diplomatic ways. But I find all too common, Simon, we have it here in the UK. Thankfully, the UK, so far as I know, has not officially made any statement of sincere condolence. But this kind of trying to play two different sides and sit on the fence and be diplomatic with individuals who want nothing more than our utter and total destruction. It's unseemly, it's immoral, it lacks clear conscience and moral clarity.
We need to call it out for what it is.
Let's hear from some first-hand sources, shall we? Let's hear from some of those people who are celebrating Raisi's death. I think that gives us a testimony as to what the Iranian public think about it.
Free people of Iran.
The free people of Iran. People are celebrating, and I congratulate the president's death. People are rejoicing at the downfall of Raisi. This is a woman's voice heard over the fireworks that are being fired off, and other man comments as well. I hope the rest of them die too. Right? Okay, this is the common populace's perspective here. I also heard people chanting, "Death to the dictator," somewhere close by, he added. Many Iranians, of course, celebrated in secret, and some people told the Telegraph that they stay awake waiting for good news to come out of the mountains. I was on my phone all night, and when I finally saw the news, I jumped from bed and started dancing, a man in Tehran said. I went to a nearby shop and it was incredible. The shopkeeper, whom I know, gave me a free cigarette and said, let's hope for more crashes like this. A shopkeeper in central Isfahan said he experienced a surge in selling sweets on Monday as people keep coming to celebrate. I mean, look at this, Simon. You're just kind of thinking like, as soon as we heard about this crash, there were images on the BBC and elsewhere of, the supreme leader saying, well, we need to pray. I'm calling the Iranian people to pray. And there were people praying. In my mind, I'm thinking, well, he's not exactly specifying or telling them what to pray for. I guarantee you many of these people were praying for this sort of news, because this is the havoc, this is the evil that was being sponsored by this Ebrahim Raisi.
And Reagan, how many Christians have died at the hands of President Raisi? How many Christians have been persecuted, tortured, and murdered by this Iranian regime?
As the head of the judiciary.
As the head of the judiciary.
As the head of the judiciary, countless. We don't have the exact figure, but between 3,000 and 30,000 different individuals were mercilessly slaughtered at the hands of this man. It's very strange and good. People come and congratulate me for the death of Raisi, this man says. It's been a long time since I saw something like this. Many are hiding their happiness because they are afraid of government spies and worried about subsequent consequences. I can't help but wonder, Simon, when I read these sorts of stories, how it is that such a minority of the Iranian populace continues to exert such great, strong control over the entire nation.
Because of the Iranian army, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, the complete power that the Basijis have to enforce the regime's will on the Iranian people. Also the fact that we see that, effectively the Iranian regime is a police state. Why anyone who criticizes the regime is kind of locked up and never seen again. And they use brute force and violence to stay in power, which they lack the legitimacy. Now, the interesting question is what happens now with the death of President Raisi? And for example, there will be 5 days of mourning. And also we know that within the next 50 days, an election has to take place to see who would become the next leader and president of Iran. But the reason why it's very interesting is that Raisi, as president, was so entrusted by the supreme leader of Iran, Khomeini, that he had a huge influence over domestic Iranian policy, but also foreign policy as well. He was seen as the successor to Khomeini himself and to become the next supreme leader of Iran, because he is the one that's really cemented the Iranian revolution after the regime was rocked to its core after the death of Mahsa Amini and the thousands of protests that took place right across Iran. So there's now speculation now that this leads a power vacuum in the heart of the Iranian regime. And it's interesting how, for example, that the unpopular but interesting son of Khomeini now has a kind of open door now to become the successor to the supreme leader. Now, he's, according to The Spectator, he is a man of independent thought, will not necessarily follow the direction that the regime wants to go in. And this spells trouble for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, who are the ones that keep the mullahs in power in Iran.
Well, it's going to be interesting. We have to have, after stated 5 days of mourning, there's going to be this presidential election within the next 50 days. And it's going to be a significant moment in regards to where this regime is going forward. Is it going to continue business as usual with its slaughter and oppression and the human rights abuses? Is there going to be some surprise? Will this be a catalyst to spark some of the Iranian populace into action and further acts of resistance against the regime?
My thoughts are on this is that it won't necessarily happen now, but when the supreme leader of Iran, Khomeini, dies, that's when the big power vacuum is. This is when the kind of future of the regime will be decided, because we've seen, for example, that the son of Khomeini is now in the prime position to become the next supreme leader of Iran. But we saw that with Mubarak, who tried to allow his own son to succeed the presidency in Egypt, and that's sparked the kind of Arab Spring. So we could see that, that the Iranian people say enough is enough.
Well, I'm reminded of the words of a song, though the nations rage, kingdoms rise and fall, there is still one king who is over all, that's King Jesus. And of course, on this program, we are all about looking forward to his coming perfect kingdom. There's much to take place in coming days on a prophetic level as we see the Lord work in power in and through these geopolitical issues. But thanks again, Simon, for a great program.
And you, Reagan, as well. Thank you. And I want to thank you for watching at home today. Let's keep the Iranian people, the free people of Iran, in our prayers. Let's stand in solidarity with them and also the Christians facing incredible persecution in Iran, and pray that this regime would actually fall. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind Headlines.